everybody. It's Jewel here with my dear friend, Mr. Kim John Payne. Kim, for everybody that's new to Kim's work, he works with over 230 maybe schools, charter schools, public schools, has written many incredible books, probably the most popular of which is Simplicity Parenting, which I believe is the name of your platform. Is that right? That's the name of your website as well?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And I was just very intrigued. I think my son might have been around 3-ish or 4-ish, something in there when we met. Mm-hmm. And a parent had recommended your book to me. And it was right at this time where my son was starting to be more of a handful at 3. And I was finding it more convenient to put him on the iPad so I could get things done. But I always noticed this phenomenon when he was done watching 1 hour of a panda bear teaching him the ABCs. He was always bored. He would come up to me and go, "I'm so bored." And I thought that was so strange. He never had said he was bored ever until he started watching this 1 hour program. And as I read your book, I realized that chemically our neurotransmitters get excited when we engage in screen time. And what a commitment it was for me to let my son watch a screen and what that does to their neurological development. So I thought it'd be really fascinating for people to understand just some of the basics. You can hear me regurgitate your book and really botch things, but I figure since you're here, you might as well do it. But one of the things I found really fascinating in his book, Simplicity Parenting, is he was noticing trauma symptoms in everyday normal children. And a lot of it had to do with the pace of everyday life. The busyness of our lives, the amount of screen time, the amount of information kids have access to. And it was starting to cause anxiety symptoms, everything from backseat driving to somewhat even OCD behaviors. And I think this is something not a lot of parents know about. We would love to learn more.
Yeah, the journey for me, it was a really interesting one because I'd spent time working in group homes for kids who'd been through, really troubled time. And I sort of came to realize, that a lot of the stuff that was going on in their behavior that was getting them into trouble was stress and anxiety related, but it was more of just a general understanding. And this was pretty new back then. Then I volunteered and I was working in various refugee camps, trouble spots around the world, and war-torn zones. And I was working up in the Thai Cambodian refugee camps just before I moved back to the West to study stress and trauma in childhood. And I was working with a lot of kids in these environments. And I came to see like nervous, jumpy, hypervigilant kids who found anything new very difficult, to let newness in, tend to loop in their behavior, like you just mentioned, Joel. And that was understandable because these kids were fleeing war, but they were wartime kids. But then when I moved to the West to study this more in London in the UK, I had this image of this nice little country counseling practice like James Harriet, where I'd be driving this nice little English car and having little rascals come through my door. And, through the door, as I was studying this stuff and in the evening I had my practice, through the door came nervous, jumpy, hypervigilant kids that looked just like they did in Asia in refugee camps, in war zones. And it was a bit of a scary thought because I thought it was a bit overwhelming, really. As a young guy, I thought, I've left all that behind. I came out of that, and leaving it behind, to then find it just found me right all over again. It was too big a thought. I thought, hang on, if these kids are looking like wartime kids, then there must be an undeclared war on childhood going on. But how is this possible? How is it possible? And I guess that's where the journey began, particularly in terms of kids' mental health, their emotional health. That's where the journey began. And I came to recognize that it wasn't exactly one or two big life-threatening events. What it was the new normal of unrelenting, under the radar, fast paced, too much, too soon, too sexy, too young, too much. And it was cumulative and it was building up. And that was my hunch. And so I then set out on a journey to actually try the hunch out. And what we did was, my hunch was, well, if this is cumulative stress, what about if we unstress? If that's happening, what would happen if we called it? If we said, hang on, this is not normal. This new normal, it's not normal. Our kids' neurological systems are just not handling it. It's too much. They're in overwhelm. They're in amygdala hijack. What about we unstress? And some pretty remarkable things started happening from that point on.
Yeah, it was fascinating I grew up on a homestead. So my parents, my dad was raised sort of in this Rudolf Steiner philosophy, which is what a lot of the Waldorf systems were based on. And it's interesting to see that a lot of parents, we all want to be good parents, right? We're parenting the best we can, obviously, and we're trying to keep up with the times. We think we need to start educating them in utero, literally, like we start playing the music and stimulating them and trying to help their brains develop literally in utero. And then, I did sign language before Case could talk, before he was verbal. And then you start to feel this real pressure of you're already aware of college, you're already aware of all these incredible pressures, and you want to do your part. And I think it's also a way of medicating our anxiety as parents, because it's very anxious becoming a parent. And a great way to medicate that is just by really focusing on helping your child develop as much as they can. But what we've actually learned is it doesn't help their brains develop in the most functioning way. What I've learned through you and studying other things is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that their neural wiring does better with what's called open play. In your book, Simplicity Parenting, you talk about this. When we have a toy do all the work for us, because it looks like an ambulance and makes noises like an ambulance, our mind isn't actually very engaged. Whereas they take kids that played with sticks and they turn that into a plane and a bridge and a train, that's creating neural connections because of the creative open play. Right now, I know parents are wanting to say, I have to do my part, have to keep my kid competitive. They have to get in the best preschools. There's so much pressure. Can you tell us why that's actually inhibiting their development?
Yeah, probably a good way to look at this is that every kid is quirky. They all have their quirks that makes them lovable and kind of infuriating, right? Mm-hmm. But they all have their quirks. And when we add cumulative stress to a child's quirk, the quirk starts to become what I call a soul fever, an emotional fever. And the quirk starts to become problematic. And if the stress continues, and by stress I mean modern pace of life, if much of it is just going too fast for kids, they can't process it all. Very few of us had to cope with anything like what our kids have to cope with today in general, both in these times but also beyond. And what happens is that quirk starts to become inflamed and it can become a disorder. So the very same thing that is a quirk can actually become problematic and a disorder. For example, let's say you got a really busy kid. It's just always doing stuff. You love it. She's always, they are always busy. But when life is pounding on them and they start to go into a survival mode, that amygdala hijack that I mentioned, what happens is that busy child becomes a little overactive, never resting, always moving, always bugging you, always wanting stimulation. But if the pace of life is still continues on, then that is a child that moves along and potentially can even become hyperactive, the so-called ADHD. But here's the great thing about this, though, and the hopeful thing about it is that what we've discovered, we have over 1,000 Simplicity Parenting coaches in the world. So this is not just, US or Eurocentric. This is all over the world. when we call it, when we say this is going too fast, she, he, they are not able to synthesize, integrate all this stuff, and we start dialing it back sensibly and realistically. We just start dialing it back. Many parents have said to me, I feel like I've got my little boy back. I feel like I've got my little girl back. It's amazing. But the truly moving thing is that if we keep simplifying, and it's almost embarrassing, it's just giving children a childhood. It's almost embarrassing to say it, right? But just giving kids space for a childhood, the behavior is not just quirky anymore. It starts to become actually funny. They get their humor back. They get their ability to bounce back. But the very same thing that is their disorder can also become their gift, even their genius. And it's a quirk. And what's beautiful about that is that to a degree, we can have a good deal of influence on that if we can, in a sense, look at this and say, how much is my child able to cope with? You see, the way I think about it is that let's say my dear friend Todd Sana gave me this image. There's a child's vessel. There's a child's cup. The metaphor is that there they are. There's their little cup, and into that comes life. There's a tap above that cup, and the tap is turned on, and life is coming into a child. All the play dates they have, the friends they have, mom and dad, sisters, cousins, things at school, it's all coming into their cup. And if it's coming in at the right level, they're hydrating. They're gaining nutrients from what's coming in, and they're able to really be sustained by it. But if there's too much coming into the cup, it starts becoming spillage. It starts spilling over the edge. And that spillage is what we call anxiety. That spillage is what I would call a soul fever, and all kinds of inflamed behavior starts setting up. And so the choice is ours. Either do we spend our life mopping up behavior, or do we just turn down the tap and just keep turning it down until we feel at a gut level, and we know this at an instinctual level, that's about right. That's about, there he is, there they are, there's my little boy, there's my girl, there she is. And just turn the pace of life of what's being expected. And there's not a formula for this. As parents, we are perfectly placed to know when that tap is turned down enough. And sometimes it can be turned down too far. For some children living in poverty, there's not enough coming into the cup, and we wish to turn it up. For many children, great many children, there's too much going on. And that's where simplicity and balance and simplicity parenting comes into it. Is it helps guide how much is enough for our child to cope with.
Yeah. I think I remember reading, it was probably in your book, that a child's brain, like I think 5 and under, can only process visual images if they're slower than 4 seconds. So if you're watching a TV show where the editing is quicker than 1/1000, 2/1000, 3/1000, 4/1000, which is every show. If the editing's quicker than that, it's actually going to skip their processing center and light up their amygdala. Their cortisol levels will rise. They'll become very enraptured, very focused, very excited. But excitement is very different than the calm and dilated state we actually need to learn and absorb information. And so they become biochemically addicted to this excitement, which is in a way getting addicted to your own biochemistry. It's getting addicted to your own excitatory neurotransmitters and your own excitatory hormones, so that normal play starts to feel boring because you want that hit, just like a little addict. And it alarmed me when I learned this, because every single show has quick editing, even the most educational ones. Made me realize how genius, Mr. Rogers really was. But it also made me realize that I don't want my son to think a calm, dilated state is antithetical, is uninteresting, because he wants to be excited so much. As adults, we're just as guilty of being addicted to distraction and excitement. We're one of the most distracted societies right now at this time. As adults, our anxiety is at all-time highs. There's such a thing as distraction addiction, where you're so used to, I think every adult watching can relate, you're so used to checking your phone for emails, your brain prompts you, just like nicotine, check your email. It's a neurological response and a neurological addiction that requires an actual detox, actually you taking time, putting your phone down and saying, I'm going to help rewire that habit so I'm not so impulsively distracting myself. It's overwhelming for us as adults. It's really hard for us to imagine for our kids how overwhelming it is. And like you said, the thing that I really loved about it is that doing less is actually the answer, probably for all of us. So right now in quarantine, we're kind of forced to do less. But if you don't have a lot of other creative skill sets, and we're trying to do so much, I mean, parents, we're trying to homeschool one and to more children. We're trying to keep the house running, it's a lot that parents are going through. What can we give parents as tools? Because it is so easy to want to turn the iPad on. It's so easy. I so understand it, even though it's creating this sort of neural addiction and this idea. Something I really want parents to kind of grasp is this idea of extrinsic entertainment versus intrinsic entertainment. When my son comes to me and says, I'm bored, I always look at him and go, that's neat. That means you're on the edge of a breakthrough. Boredom is good. You're this far away from discovering some cool new game or inventing something. But it's so painful for us parents to help them through that bored, whiny phase, get through it. I feel like it's harder on me than him. And to really help enforce with parents, what are other things we can do? What's the importance of play?
And this is kind of leads into what you were also asking, Jewel. I think those two things kind of blend, is that when you look at what's going on at the moment, any parent is going to look to try and balance a child's life out, and it's a question of how do we balance? How do we get this back, get it back into shape? How do we pull our lives back into shape at the moment? Because it's just been, really knocked all out of whack. There's four key ways that we're discovering that have been extremely effective. The first way to signal a young child, particularly young kids, is to declutter the environment, to take the time. A lot of us are doing it anyway, because what else are we going to do? But is to really add spaciousness to a child's life and declutter toys and books and clothes, cupboards, pantries, kitchen shelves. Just declutter and make it clean and spacious. And the reason for that is not a random thing at all. Life has gotten a little bit overwhelming for a lot of kids. They're aware that big things have changed. And we can talk to them a lot about how they're okay and they're safe with us and so on. But for younger children, certainly younger than sort of 8 or 9 years old, that's okay. It's good to say it. But what they're really going to pick up on is when things are orderly and spacious in their environment. They're much more creatures of their senses and creatures of their environment. So when the world is disorderly, as it is right now, we can't do much about it. But what we can do is that we can make our world inside our house as orderly as possible, as spacious and orderly, because the world is kind of pressing in. I don't know if you've experienced this, Jewel. A lot of people have said it's almost like I'm feeling a weight, a pressing in at the moment. Have you heard people talking about that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. And it's a kind of it's what many of us are experiencing. And so in a way, just to have that clarity at home, uncluttering. By the way, here's just a small tip. If you do start to declutter at home, one of the best things to do is start decluttering your own space, like the pantry, the cupboards, the kitchen, the lounge room, and have a child join you so they don't feel like you're going at their space prematurely. Mm. And then start to sort of ripple it out into bedrooms of the children, your own bedroom, and so that you start small within your own space and then ripple it out. Many, many, many parents have found this settles the kids right on down. They love it. It also gives them stuff to do, and it gives that feeling of spaciousness.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. That's number one. Yeah.
I think really trusting your child's ability to entertain themselves and self-play. You know, I think as a parent, I always felt like I had to entertain my child 24/7, that was somehow my job. It isn't actually my job. And the more that my son learns to entertain himself intrinsically, it builds actually his self-esteem from the inside out, which is what we want. Because he learns, he has these whole imaginary worlds inside of him, and he makes up games, and those things are interesting to him, and it gives him confidence. So part of what I would say to this gentleman is, you know, support your wife in knowing that her child is probably is going to be okay. With a 3-year-old, is there something specific that's a good activity for parents to do with a 3-year-old that is young?
Well, one of the things that would support this dear man's wife, and the question there is to introduce, is to help her, and this goes for us all, is to introduce rhythm and predictability. Our children's rhythms have really been knocked out of whack. There's life was just chugging on along, and very short time ago, it changed, and it changed a lot. Now, children are creatures of rhythm. They thrive on it, and rhythm helps a child feel safe. We can say to a child, you're safe with us. But saying to a child, you're safe over and over makes them wonder if they're not safe. So what signals to a child they're safe and secure is the rhythms of the day, getting up in the morning in a certain way, coming downstairs, having breakfast in a certain way, and then after breakfast clearing up in a certain way. A 3-year-old will imitate and help, you know, you clear up. Takes much, much longer, but they're helping, you know, and to develop. Then after that, we do this, and then after that, we do this. We even developed here at Simplicity Parenting a rhythm clock with little pictures that a little hand goes through the day and shows children the actual what's coming next. And children come up and they just stare at it. They just stare at that, like, and then they'll turn around and say, okay, it's snack next. It's snack. It's like the town crier, right? But if you can help, to this gentleman, if you can help your wife, or we can just do it for ourselves, establish predictable rhythms. One mum said to me recently, I had a pretty good rhythm in my home, but when I really doubled down on it, I feel like now I've actually got a kindly grandmother living with me. Mm-hmm. One that's really helpful and doesn't give, you know, like iPads and stuff. But I feel like I've got an extra partner with me, which was a lovely comment, because she was a single mum, a double mum. It's such a silly term, single mum, a double mum, right? Double everything. But rhythm, predictability, if you can get, because then the kids get into a slipstream. And, you know, Jewel, it's a little bit like you were mentioning, then we don't feel like we need to play with them 24/7 and edutain them, always be entertaining, always be stimulating. They can then just dive down into their own deep play space. But as you beautifully put, allows them to digest the world. Because at the moment, they've got a lot of digesting to do. There's a lot of stuff that's been going on. And if we can give our kids the gift of boredom, like, you know, one mum said to a child, she told me when her child says, Mom, I'm bored and nothing to do. And she says to her children, you know, something really good to do is just around the corner. Why don't you go and look for it? I mean, you can get away with that only for a certain number of years. But giving kids the gift of boredom is fantastic, because creativity will break out, but it's not creativity of someone else. It's not on a screen. That's someone else's creativity.
Yeah.
It's inner creativity. And that, again, is a really big help right now for our kids. Right now, that's a big help. But it's also going to be a big help in the future, because we're going into a world that is rapidly unstructuring. But if we've got a 10-year-old right now, by the time that 10-year-old is post-college, if they go to college and hitting the workplace, just over 60%, given the present curve, just over 60% of all employment will be self-employed, right? It'll be project-based, where kids have to develop this out of themselves. Now, Jewel, you've been, well, any musician is self-employed. If I could ask you genuinely, what does it take to be self-employed? If you had to rattle off like 4 or 5 keywords of what does it take to make it in the non-employed world, what would some words be that occur to you?
Yeah, I've done this research on what I think they're calling this the gig economy that our kids will be inheriting. And the skill sets that they're going to need are going to be highly entrepreneurial, highly creative problem solving, being comfortable with the unknown, being comfortable with something coming out of nothing, inventing jobs, inventing solutions to problems. The jobs that our kids will be working at won't even be invented while they're in college. This is how quickly the world is changing. And to your point, our education system right now isn't really teaching kids those skill sets. The way we're teaching them to memorize and interact with education isn't giving them this highly resilient style of learning. And that's, again, why this creative play, why being bored is so important. It's why I'm good at my job, is because I only had nature to entertain me. And so I wrote and I investigated and I invented things. And I was comfortable with the unknown, which really helps with the musician type of career. Speaking of which, Brad Paisley is in the waiting room, and I would love to bring him in because I would love to get his thoughts on this. So if we could bring Mr. Paisley in. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Yeah, how's it going over there? My son isn't overly social at this age. He's 8. But for the much more social teenagers where their peer groups are much more important, I imagine it would be a lot harder. What are you hearing from parents, Kim, in the community? What do you really see parents kind of struggling with?
Yeah, it's really interesting what you were you were saying just now, Brad, that you've been homeschooling, and chances are, you've walked onto this. Many parents who have done their best to just live life at a pace that feels doable, to live life just a little more simply. It's almost like there's a bunch of parents these days, and it really is a big group now, who have built the family ark before the social flood. And that's the way it seems to me a lot, is that we're building that. If we hadn't built that ark before, then we're sure going to have it in good shape by the time this is done. Right? It's for kids who are living a very high velocity life. They kind of fell off a cliff, so to speak, because there was just nothing much. Kids who weren't strongly connected at home, this has been really intense because they're not used to sitting down for 3 meals a day or even 1 meal a day with their parents. And for kids that were used to just really having a lot of schedules, play dates, sports clubs, just a lot. This has been more of a challenge for some parents, and it's taken a little longer. But now with the amount of time we're into this, a bunch of parents have adjusted. They're realizing that living a simple, balanced life is no longer all that much of a choice. It just is. It's been handed to us. And the thing that I've heard a lot of parents talking about is as we get through this and after we're through it, they're going to try and make some judgments. They're going to try and make some judgments about what is allowed back in, and to filter a little bit, and make some decisions about what they're going to enter back into and what they're not going to do. It's a little bit like one parent said to me a couple of days ago, I said to her, how you doing? And she said, it's like the power got cut. And it's like everything just stopped. But when the power gets cut and you light candles all around the place, it feels so great. And she said, it's starting to feel great. But the metaphor she was using of the power, she said, but when the power comes back on, it's just too much noise, too much light. And so what we're going to do, using that metaphor of the power coming back on, is make sure that when life gets back to normal, we're going to make sure that we're not going to just jump back into the fast lane again. And that's maybe a silver lining in this, is it showed us another way to live. Many parents are commenting on that. And I think probably, Brad, for you at home, you've always had that kind of perhaps just more simple, balanced pace of life, right? If you're homeschooling, that's what's been going on for you anyway, right?
I think so. I mean, these guys, we try our best to we don't. It's sort of a choice in how you handle, an entertainment career with children, and to each his own. With us, we don't like from day one. We don't even show pictures of them. It's mostly that they're ugly, but teasing. No, but it's they don't have any social media accounts. They don't have, we have tried to sort of raise them on this farm a bit where, look, there's going to be areas that are beyond normal for them being children of celebrities. But we've tried our best to keep them. And the main thing is I've tried to shelter them from the sort of overexposure that comes from feeling like they don't have control of their lives. And in our case, like in this time period now, it's such a strange thing because it's all online, and it's a strange time where the only way to see their friends, other than their grandparents who are the other people in our sort of pod right now, is online, is like doing this very thing right here. And I feel like, I feel like there's a moment that's happening in our society that's really kind of healthy, in that we used to take that cell phone and we used to sit in the corner, and the room was full of people and we were on there and ignoring the room, and it was separating us from people. And it's become this thing now that, like, on Saturday night, this is a great example of things that never would have happened 4 weeks ago. Saturday night, Peyton Manning texts me and says, "Hey, get on this Zoom." And I'm like, why? And he's like, "Just do it." Now, so I go on. And the next thing you know, he's like, "Okay, get a famous person from your phone book, have them Zoom in right now. It's their challenge." And we wound up with 50 celebrities in a room on a drinking party on Saturday night. It was the most fascinating group. I got Darius. It was Dan Patrick. There were basketball players, football players. Kevin Hart ended up in there. It was like so interesting. And I think that as adults, we're probably learning just about as much as about ourselves as our kids are, but our kids are going to wind up better people for having been through this. We're going to be the ones, I think, we're going to be the weird old grandparents with a closet full of toilet paper that they're like, "Why does Papa keep all that toilet paper on hand?" Because my grandmother used to keep jars of pennies and quarters hidden and only tell me where they were. I was like, "Why did she do this?" But she lived through World War II. She lived, you know what I mean? She knew it could crumble. And
I think that point of what you're saying of, we've been connected as a society a long time. The internet's been around, we've been connected, but has the quality of that connection been nourishing? Has it been feeding us in a way that makes us better, or has it been depleting us and making us more sick or ill or malnourished, if you will, energetically? And I do find this is causing people to get really serious about what type of connection feeds me versus what type of connection depletes me, and using it much more thoughtfully. And hopefully that is a change going forward. Can I be super greedy and ask you to sing a song, Brad?
Well, yeah, great non sequitur. Let me grab a guitar. I'll do it.
I got to tour with Brad. It was quite a while ago now, maybe 2008 or something.
Yeah, it might have been. That might have been that long ago.
We had a great time on the road. The country industry, because I got to come up through the folk and alternative pop and then into the countryside. My whole career, the people that were always the kindest to me and reached out to me and made friends with me were always on the countryside. And it's been really sweet because the people that are helping me set up the TV show, they were like, Brad and his team are so nice. They're just so nice and so easy to deal with. And it's really true. Everybody in Nashville, it's just been this incredible community. I have never ceased being impressed with how many times in Nashville you'll run into somebody and they'll be like, how can I help you? What can I do for you? If you have a cause, they will show up. People will show up and really support one another. It's a great town. And with what they went through with the flood a couple years ago, and then now with the tornado, and this is just such a special town, Nashville.
So this is interesting. There's two ways to go with the situation we're in, I think. And you know me, Jewel, I'm a yin and yang kind of artist. It's either really dark and deep or romantic or something, or Roger Miller side of the coin. And I released this yesterday. We just dropped it out of the blue because I had written this in 2018, and it's like, how do you put a song out right now? First of all, there's things that don't work. Like, you can't do a song that's like, let's all go to the bar tonight and release that this week without it feeling, first of all, sort of depressing and also kind of like that doesn't feel right now. And it's like, so I had written the song 2 years ago, and it was kind of a party song. And then when I went back and looked at it, and everybody started using the phrase, we're all in this together. Well, I had written this chorus in 2018 and performed it several times to, rowdy applause on the drunken lawn at the amphitheater. But all of a sudden, everything feels different. And the same phrase, which is the opening line of this chorus, feels like a rallying cry as opposed to just a party song. Huh. So I'll play this for you guys a little bit. It's very lighthearted, but in some way it feels like medicine to me. Wherever you are tonight, whatever you're going through, grab a long neck bottle or a big old pint and let's all have a few. 'Cause we're all in this together. There's always next year. Drinking ought to be a team effort. There is no I in beer. You got a buddy who's heartbroken. Tell you what, see if you can get him on the phone. It's new, I don't know it. Say life ain't fair, we all been there, and no one should drink alone. But we're all in this together, that's why God put us here. Drinking ought to be a team effort, there is no I in beer, and there ain't no you right in beer, that's right. There's about to be a lot of beer in you and I. This was gonna be our season. We were the team to beat. Now what's the daggum word? We were the team to beat. Oh, but not anymore. We're looking at the score in shock and disbelief. But we're all in this together, and there's always next year. Drinking ought to be a team effort. There is no I in beer. To the farmers and the first responders, to the truck drivers shifting gears, every nurse that needs a break, let me buy you a drink. There ain't no I in beer.
Yay. Well, please tell your kids hi. Tell your mom and dad hi. Tell Kim hi.
Well, likewise, and listen, good luck with everything, and we'll talk soon, and I hope you stay sane, and I can't wait to hear what you create out of this.
We've been getting a lot of amazing questions in, and I really, one of the first and foremost is I let my assistant know that you were with us today, and she's a huge fan of yours. She got to know your work through me, and she's always going, if you ever talk to Kim, would you ask him this question for me? So I'm texting her right now to say that she should call in. If people watching have questions about anxiety, about the effects of screen time on our development, either for our children or for ourselves as adults, questions about just parenting in the modern age, I was fascinated to learn that kids brains perceive the pace of modern life as trauma. And one of the things we're really being forced to look at during this COVID quarantine is the pace of modern life. And if we can start making decisions during this time to help us bring us closer, more connected, as well as how to re-enter society when these quarantines are lifted, I think are really helpful and very, very useful. One thing we were talking a lot about, Kim, was rhythm. That was a really hard one for me. I'm a musician, and it was something I actually wanted to ask Brad about. Rhythm is something I've struggled with. I never had rhythm. You know, between the ages of 8 and 18, I had 22 different homes. I never had a closet. I lived out of a backpack my entire life. And then I became a musician. So, I mean, I was built to do what I'm doing, but rhythm was not my strength. When you talk about rhythm, I know it varies a little bit for different ages. And so I definitely want to get into some questions of parents that are coming through. But what does rhythm consist of? You mentioned it's waking up with similar things, similar sounds, maybe going to bed with the same music. With my son on the road, I learned to do lavender scents wherever we were, so everything kind of smelled the same. I had little teeny routines, even though things were changing so much. What other kinds of tips can you give parents right now that might help their kids deal and process with the sort of uncertainty and unknown right now?
Yeah, you know, that's really neat about the lavender, actually, Joel. I didn't know you did that.
I was trying to think of things. You advised me to keep rhythm, and I was like, how do I do this? I'm in a new hotel every day.
Right, but olfaction, right? Smell and olfaction is one of our really, for a child, it's a very primal, primitive sense. I mean, if you go back to your grandma's house, provided grandma was a good experience, and you walk in that door and you smell grandma's house, it's just safety right there. You know, that's what smells do. So that was really intuitive. That's great. The things that rhythm brings, I mean, it's so amazing what parents do, the various things that people come up with. But essentially, the way I think of it is it's all the little rituals, all the funny little things that we do in our family. You know, those little rituals are the stepping stones to a greater rhythm. The way a child wakes up, or right at the other end of the day, what do you say to your child right before they go to sleep? Do you say it in the same way? Do you have, if they're little, do you have their bath time and then teeth and then hair brushing? And does it happen roughly in the same way, roughly at the same time? Now, this is hard stuff, and I know, you know, and if we can't pull off rhythm all the time, what we can pull off is predictability. To say to a child, you know what, sweetheart, tomorrow we normally would be doing this, but tomorrow what's going to happen is this, and it's a little bit different. Like predictability is like the little brother of rhythm. And we can, at night when we have I call it the rose and thorn ceremony, right? You have this little rose, like what was the best part of today? Again, for little kids, or even slightly older ones, what was the best part of today? That's the rose. What was the worst part of the day? That's the thorn. And then tomorrow, what's going to be the thorn? What's something you're really not looking forward to? And then what's going to be something you are looking forward to? Rose, thorn, thorn, rose. And sometimes kids can't think of all that. They can only think of one or two. But what you do is you add predictability into the day, because you're unpacking the day at one end and you're looking forward to the next day, and you're anticipating, and you're giving those little footholds, because little children, even teenagers and teenagers, they're very vulnerable. You know, they don't have a lot of power in their life. We are the people that provide and protect as best we can with all our fallibilities. And if we say something is going to happen tomorrow and we predict it and it comes true, then we're so cool. We're magic, right? You imagine, like, for a 4-year-old, we say we're going to be doing this, and we're going to be building a swing tomorrow out in the yard, and then there's rope there, there's a piece of wood there, and like, my mom is so cool. She said this was going to happen, and it's going to happen. That's what secures a child. That's what actually, we were mentioning before, Jill, brings them out of that amygdala, out of that reptilian fight, flight, freeze or flock. And it's what starts myelinating, literally laying down pathways to their empathy brain, their humor brain, the cognitive brain, the smart brain. That what rhythm does is it lays down those neural pathways. It's a big part of it. So when we have predictability and rhythm, we're making our kid cognitively, socially, and emotionally flexible and smart. And we can do it more or less. And one of the great things I love about rhythm, and this is particularly for like someone like yourself, a musician on the road, someone like myself also who travels a lot, is that when you have good rhythms in a home, relatively good as you can make it, then it buys you times when things go wacko, because you've got something to come back to, and you can get a child back into the slipstream of rhythm so that and it's portable and you can take it with you. Like your lavender, that was really neat. But you can take, I know when you were traveling with Case, you still stayed with rhythms as best you could. And I remember us meeting up together and you saying, now Case, we're going to do this. And you were far and I were far away from home, but he still had the little things that he did. They're those rhythms are highly portable. And in this time we're living in, I think that kind of thing is going to become super important.
It's very true. I was trying to think. The Rose and Thorn Case really enjoyed doing that. I noticed when I telegraphed things for my son, it really helped him. Tomorrow we're going to be doing X. I realized how many plans I made that I felt like my whole household knew, but I didn't actually tell Case. So everything was sort of a surprise, when to me they were not a surprise because I've been planning them for weeks. And I was like, I have to be a better communicator to my son. And so I really started to make a habit using that Rose and Thorn at night to say, tomorrow we're going to do X. I found that my son really thrives when I'm very clear about expectations. I remember when he was young, for some reason, we were going into restaurants a lot. We ate out all the time, so I was one of those rare parents where we ate out more than in because we were on the road so much. So manners in a restaurant were kind of a big thing. And I realized all these terms are so broad. You have to have good manners. But unless you break down what good manners consist of, it's just, how are they going to succeed? And so learning to break things down into bite-sized bits, learning to explain things that are just concepts that we take for granted, like sharing. What are the rules to sharing? Sharing, I don't know, it's just a concept. So really getting clear for my son, when you put a toy down, then somebody else gets to have it. Kind of having ground rules, so it wasn't just some weird big blanket philosophy, frankly, that a kid has no concept of it. And I found that with manners. For manners, you're going to see a hostess. I want you to look her in the eye and say hi. When the waitress comes, I want you to say, I'd like juice, thank you. And so I broke it down into simple little 3 things that now he felt like he knew what was expected ahead of time. Every little step of the way, he got to fulfill it. Like, here she comes, you're going to say hi. And he would say hi, and it was kind of like a boost. And then here she comes, remember what you're going to ask her. And now I still notice I'm doing that, even though he's 8, and what we break down is much different. But learning to greet people at the door and offer them a glass of water, for instance, now is more of a thing that he'll do. And reminding him and letting him know I expect it so that he can then succeed at it. I've found those kinds of things incredibly helpful. We're also doing high-low buffalo. We've kind of progressed from Rose and Thorn for some reason to his high of the day, his low of the day, and then the buffalo is the wild card. So just anything he feels like sharing. And that really does become this amazing tool of establishing it so young, so that hopefully, and you probably see this a lot, he continues talking at night with me, where it becomes a real time that's so familiar to share and talk about your day and the goods and the bads.
Well, and that's got a little bit to do with the time that we're living in now. Is one of the key questions is for children. I had a chance to look through some of the questions, And there's a whole cluster of questions that are dealing with anxiety, the anxiety of that kids are living through, feeling bad that there are so many people out there who are not doing well, and so on. And I think being able to say to our kids that out there are people, kind people, good people doing really great things for us, and we're so grateful and so thankful to them for doing it, you know. And in here in our home, you know, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, it's just the same. This is our little world, and you're okay here. You're going to be okay. And even if they're teenagers, you know, voicing it differently, but you're okay here. And there are people out there doing what they were trained to do and what they're choosing to do. And they love to do this. They want to do this. And they're doing that for us. And to be able to express gratitude towards them at nighttime, maybe at meal times, is whenever it feels right for a family. I think it secures a child. For older children, one of the things we can do is say, look, what can you do? I mean, there's been many kids now sitting down sewing masks, getting stuff together for first responders. Older kids and even little ones can be doing what they can within their home, and that also gives that feeling of empowerment as well. I picked up before in what you were saying, and Brad was mentioning it too, that you're limiting the amount of news consumption that you're having. And that was really interesting, Jewel, because what you didn't say, I know you do this anyway, but you didn't say, I'm limiting news consumption for my son, because you are. I know that. But what was for me even more interesting, because I know you're doing that, but is that you're limiting news consumption for yourself.
Yeah.
And because if we can do that for ourselves, our nervous systems calm down, and then our kids can moor their little emotional canoes alongside us, and then they can co-regulate. You know, one of my favorite stories, you know this story, Joel, I wrote about this in one of my books, is the story from Joseph Chilton Pearce when I was at a talk of his, and he said, when you take a cell out of a heart, and it'll continue to beat. You put it on a special solution, it'll continue to beat. But then it'll fibrillate and expire. But if when it's fibrillating, you take a cell out of a completely different heart and put it nearby, the fibrillating cell will start beating in unison with the cell that's nearby. And the two will last much, much longer than they otherwise would have. Now, the reason I mention that is that if we can limit our news consumption, we're doing something to regulate our own beating emotion so that our children beside us can actually then co-regulate, because they need to co-regulate with us. It's very, very important they do that right now. And what's fascinating to me is that if we hear a news report and it's kind of scary, and we hear it, okay, and then the radio's on or the TV's on, and then we hear it half an hour later, we get a hit of adrenaline and cortisol, and if we hear it half an hour later, we get another hit of adrenaline and cortisol. And just because we heard it one time, two times, three times, our brain, our ancient brain, our reptilian brain is not that evolved. It gives a squirt of these emotions every single time. And before you know it, we start to become almost like depleted. There's a feeling of depletion with us personally, but it also means our kids we're not a safe place anymore. We need to be that as much as possible, that beating heart. Many parents, I don't know if you're doing this, Joyce, well, I suspect you are very much, but it's important that we keep doing what we do, a walk in nature if we can, journaling if we can, stretching, yoga if we can, whatever it is that will regulate us. It's not selfish to do it.
Yeah.
We need to be able to do that. Get out in the garden, plant something. Even if it's just for us, that's very important. Are you finding yourself these days turning to things that you love to do so that your son can regulate with you?
Yeah, self-care was one of the hardest things for me to get. I mean, I understood it intellectually and that you should and that it was important, but had a very hard time putting it into practice. I have found no other thing that has been as impactful on my son's well-being as my well-being. And you hear all the stories about, it's like being on an airplane. You have to put your mask on first before you help your child. Once I started, meditating in the mornings and including really doing a practice where that works for me, that refreshes me, that helps me feel better, any tension there ever was with my son and I would really magically melt away. It was wild. You look at particle non-locality and physics and you start to get a glimpse into the mystery of how these things work, this two heart cells that you were mentioning. I don't understand it completely, but I can tell you, like, without a shadow of a doubt, when I'm calm and centered, my son can access me in a very different way, and he regulates in a very different way. I'm definitely a parent, if something's wrong, I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to understand it. That wasn't helping. When I sat still and got myself in a really good place, he smoothed out immediately. And I also really, I feel fortunate. I'm a pioneer from a pioneer state, from a family of pioneers. And I've been through enough things that I've started to develop a muscle, and I'm 45, at this point in my life, I have a muscle that says, I look forward to disrupted times. I didn't always feel that way because they scared me. I'm old enough now to know I lived through them, and I've proven to myself that I get better through them. And I have a little bit of a track record, so I can relax in that. For people that may not have that track record, it's good to look at, the evolution of humanity. We have to evolve as a species to stay in relationship to nature, to each other. Relationships ask us to evolve. We're being asked to evolve in real time, and that's a painful thing, but it's also really exciting. And so as much as I really am impressing upon my son that there's a lot to be anxious about. This is a different time. The unknown is uncertain. But that's also something to get excited about. It's a time to roll up your sleeves because we are built for this. And I love instilling that excitement in my son of like, we're made for this. We're humans. This is what we do. We go through difficult times and we evolve and we figure it out and we get better. We have all these skills, generational, genetic, going back for millennia of we know what to do. And if we can just trust our nature and dare let part of ourselves get excited, it puts a lot of energy into a creative space because worrying is just a misuse of creativity. It's a misuse, it's a mischanneling of our creativity. So if I can, and I'm very prone to worrying. And so if I can take that worry and imagine it when I meditate into this pool of energy, and now I'm going to dedicate it to asking myself interesting questions. What do I want to get out of this time? What is a new form of activism? What have I always wanted to let go of that I never had the courage to do? What would I want to replace that? Those types of questions engage our creativity in an interesting way instead of a one that sets us back.
One of the things I was struck with, Jill, in your book Never Broken, that I quoted in one of the books I wrote, Soul of Discipline. I quoted it in another book more recently. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But it's was this hard wood grows slow. This principle of hard wood grows slow. And I wonder if you can describe what struck you about hardwood grows slow. And the reason I ask you to describe that, because it's a beautiful passage. It's a beautiful, depthful idea or reality, actually, is that if we can say to our kids, we are built for this, we are strong, we are built for this. If we grow them slow and strong, that's even more true. So growing kids slow and strong really speaks to me about hardwood grows slow. Would you tell that story?
Yeah. I grew up in nature, and so I saw nature everywhere, and it became my teacher. And I noticed some trees grew quickly and fell over. Other trees grew very slowly, but they lasted forever. And I, pretty young, identified I want to be that tree that lasts forever. And for some reason, the metaphor always really struck me and stayed with me my whole life. And I was a bit scared, obviously, when I moved out at 15. And my motto of hardwood grows slowly, I was trying to figure out how you break that down. What does that mean? You know, how do you grow slowly? For me, I identified these different parts of the tree. The root system keeps you anchored. It's everything, all the work below the ground that you never see, that is everything. It allows the fruit to grow. But the fruit is just a phenomenon of a good root system. And so what roots me, for me, who's always lived pretty much on the wind, what is a rooting thing? And for me, it was values. I really felt like my roots were values. And that was something I really, when my son asked me one day, he asked me, well, I grew up to be a good person. And I was putting him to bed and I was like, I don't know. I said it absentmindedly. I just slipped out of my mouth. You know, will I be a good person? And I responded, I don't know. I was suddenly shocked of like, oh no. He goes, what? And I go, what? He goes, you don't know if I'll be a good person? And I was like, oh my God, what's happened here? This was not the bedtime conversation I thought I'd have. But I sat down and, you know, realized a moment was upon me. And he goes, well, how will I grow up to be a good person? And I said, first of all, you're already a good person. So it's already there. You're already that. That will never be taken away from you. But if you're talking about what kind of adult will you become, you know, how do you not get lost in a forest? And he said, a compass. And I said, what is your compass in the forest of life? He didn't know. And I said, it's your values. The only reason I knew that is because that's what it's been for me. You know, if you don't want to get lost in the forest of life, if you follow your values every day and you take a step in alignment with your values, you'll end up in a beautiful place. You'll end up the kind of person in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years that you hoped you would become. And your values are a living principle. You know, they're not a dogma. They're a living philosophy that you try and embody every day. And the only value I would recommend to anybody, and that I recommended to my son that night, was making an amends. Because we're not perfect. We don't live our values all the time. That's not evolution. And so when we make a mistake or when we don't live a value or if we betray a value, we can make an amends, make it right, and move on the next day. So that night, my son wrote down his 3 values. They were to be kind, to care for the earth, and to be silly. I thought were 3 great values for, I think he was 5 at the time. Now he is probably 6 or 7. And when I drop him off at school or off at things, I go, which value do you want to try and look for today? Like an Easter egg hunt. You'll just see it magically. If you know you want to live being kind today, you'll find this magic opportunity that'll present itself and you'll recognize it and you'll go, ah, there it was. So for me, that hardwood grows slowly was so profound in my life. It's why I didn't take $1 million signing bonus as a homeless kid that got signed and discovered, because I felt like it was too much too soon and you crack under that type of pressure. Taking pressure off yourself, growing really slowly from the inside out is so important. And it has saved me as an artist, as a mom, as a human. It's not the sexiest life slogan, but I feel like it's been a really good one for me for sure.
But Jill, the hardwood grows slow it's almost counterculture. You know, it's almost un-American. It's just giving kids the space to grow slowly, just giving them the time, the space, and not trying to grow them up too soon, not trying to make a softwood out of them, because the softwood won't stand not so well when that storm blows. And I was thinking about what you were saying with hardwood grows slow. A couple of weeks ago, my phone's been ringing a lot, you know, with parents, and I've been doing my best to support all these beautiful parents really thinking about what they can do. And I was thinking about, you know, hardwood does grow slow, but because the bough is so strong, the trunk is so strong, I beg your pardon, the boughs can reach out wide and provide a lot of shade. That's a big old shady tree right there, because it's grown up slowly. And it's almost like we're saying to our kids, come on into our shade right now, particularly. Come on in. It's cool and safe and warm, and there's leaves and it's soft. And it's almost like as a mom or as a dad, we're just reaching out with our boughs at the moment saying, you know, I hope I'm a hardwood and I hope I'm standing strong on my values, and come on in. It's a safe place in here. And then there's this thought that you were talking about with Case is follow your values, right? Follow your values. And I often think of that as true north as opposed to magnetic north. Like magnetic north, it'll get you someplace, but it'll get you where everyone's going, where everyone else is going, regardless of whether it's healthy or not. That's where you'll go if you follow magnetic north. And it's real easy as a parent to follow magnetic north, to say, well, everyone's doing it. You know, you look at your neighborhood and everyone's doing play dates and sports clubs afterwards, and a travel team, and then soccer clubs and ballet clubs. And it's like parenting has become like a competitive sport.
Yeah, it's true.
Getting your kids into so much stuff. It's like a parental arms race, you know, and we look around your neighborhood and you think, well, everyone's doing it. It's got to be okay. That is magnetic north. And what so many of us are trying to do as parents now is that we've kind of, I think we've kind of reached peak stress. We're there. One of the things that these times we're living in right now is showing me with good friends, dear friends, family, ourselves here. We've reached a sort of a crescendo in a certain sense, and it's saying what is magnetic north, but truly what is true north, and it's giving us the time to say, to almost like. It's almost like Dad said this to me, who was an aeronautical engineer. He gave me this metaphor just this week. He said, I'm working from home now. He worked for NASA. And he was saying, I feel like I'm re-entering my family's atmosphere. And a lot of stuff that I used to think was important is burning away as I re-enter this atmosphere. And that image, he just thought of it just like that. I said, have you been thinking about that for a while? And he said, no, that's my job. That's what I do. But I think for a lot of us, this question of true north, I wonder if we're going to come out of this, if we give ourselves the space and grace of the times we're living in. I wonder if we're going to, if we can challenge ourselves and say, when we come out of this, I'm going to try and come out of this with my values clarified.
I think it's a beautiful thing. Like if I could give people homework, it would be write down what I want to get out of this experience. What are the values? Because we should always question our values. We should always update them. We should always see if they still fit. We should see if anything's missing. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for taking the time. It's just your friendship's been just such a lifesaver to me multiple times, and I'm honored that you would spend this time with us. Thank you.
Likewise. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you for hanging on in there. It's been a lovely, long, beautiful night. And Jill, thank you so much for inviting me into this workshop tonight.
Likewise. Well, thank you. All right, everybody, have a wonderful night.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.